I need to say something about affect, because I'm quite interested in affect, and particularly how Freud conceptualized affect. I mean, if we think about affect on a more general level, affect is something that is, or contemporary sort of affect theories often are used or sort of evoked to signify relations, a relationality between subjects, particularly between non-human entities and subjects, or humans and objects, and how affect is something that sort of flows and moves between bodies, between objects. It's about ideas of excess, and something that as many affect theories argue is actually something that's beyond discourse. It's sort of pre-discursive or beyond discourse, or it's the whole idea is to disrupt the idea that emotions are something that can always be discursively fixed. And what about the idea that there are states that we cannot actually define as emotions? So that's where contemporary affect theory is sort of coming from, and is partly, of course, a response to a very critical response to psychoanalysis. So there is a slight contradiction there now when I say, actually I'm interested in Freudian thought on affect, which is something that's not really being discussed in academia, because Freud actually conceptualizes affect as something that is a subjective bodily experience. So it is something that is quite subjective, but it's also can sort of come to the fore in intersubjective dynamics and in relational dynamics between people, and it's always something that is also sort of goes towards the social. To sort of be a bit more specific, what he means by affect is that quite central to his idea is that in an affective experience, the subject sort of undergoes a particular experience, and Freud says which is then discharged. And what he means by this idea of discharge is that then this affective experience sort of fades away, and the subject returns to a sort of normal state again. And quite central to this idea is also that for him, in this moment of affect, it's like a kind of bodily dispossession. So the subject sort of feels or experiences feelings or of being beside oneself and of not being in control of oneself. And the psychoanalyst Ruth Stein has provided quite a good definition where she says, "My body speaks itself to me. When I'm feeling, I possess my body, but at the same moment, the body is also its own speaker, and the three terms join together and link possession, the object of the possession, body, and that which denies my possession, it speaks. And in that way, it's his own master or speaker, thereby denying my possession of itself." And you could say that particularly, the last sentence is quite central to psychoanalysis anyway, because psychoanalysis is all about sort of arguing that, there are many processes or experiences where we actually are denied our own sort of possession and our own agency and conscious agency and control that we have over ourselves. So affect is about a momentary loss of control and of bodily agency. And the other very brief thing that I want to mention is that Freud makes a distinction between what he calls affect and idea. And these two can be sort of very much are very much related. So he says that an idea is sort of the content of a thought, or it's either something that is sort of perceived externally, or something that is sort of thought about internally. So, for example, a thought or a fantasy, or it refers to a sort of mental act. Of course, this is probably quite debatable, to what degree these things are actually sort of relate to sort of neuroscience, and I'm really not familiar with that. We've heard a lot about neuroscience, so this is a sort of theoretical construct that Freud, of course, came up with. What's important here is that whereas an idea refers to a sort of mental act of sort of perceiving something or thinking about something, the affect is something that's much more difficult to sort of pinpoint or to sort of discursively frame. So an affect always has sort of its own qualities to it that the subject finds difficult to understand or to come to terms with. And this, I argue, relates quite nicely to alienation, which is, of course, a concept that Marx came up with, where he says in capitalism, the worker is alienated in the relation to the products of labor, in the relation to the labor process, so to the machines that they use to produce a certain good, because the worker has to sell their labor power. The worker doesn't own the machines that they use, and doesn't own the product that they produce, and they're also alienated from themselves as a result, and from other human beings. The philosopher Rahel Yegi terms alienation, therefore, a relation of relationlessness. So she says the scandal of alienation is that it is an alienation from something the self has made. It is our own activities and products, social institutions and relations that we ourselves have produced that have turned into an alien power. So, and this idea of alienation has been taken up in this whole digital labor debate, in the whole debate, on free labor, that's sort of advanced by people like Terra Nova, Christian Fuchs, Mark Andreevich, and a lot of others, where, for example, Fuchs and Sevignani say, Facebook is actually a sort of space or place where alienation takes place, because Facebook users sort of have no alternative to Facebook. They're sort of coerced to use Facebook because everybody is on there. They don't own the website, or they don't own Facebook. And of course, user data is extracted and mined for advertising purposes, so that Facebook can maximize their profit. And quite importantly, users have actually, and perhaps unwittingly, agreed to all of this. So they have agreed to a relation that puts them in a state of being alienated. And okay, so what does this term of alienation, which is sort of being used quite generally in sort of critical theory, what does it actually mean, or how can we think about alienation on Facebook, or to what extent is it applicable? That's our questions that I asked myself, and I'm going to talk about two quotes or two posts by users that were posted on a particular Facebook page that is an official Facebook page, which is called Site Governance Page, or Facebook Site Governance, where Facebook officials or Facebook employees occasionally sort of post updates about Facebook, about changes to terms and conditions, about new features that they are introducing, about privacy issues, that sort of thing. So the idea is sort of for a space within Facebook where they can communicate in a transparent manner what sort of changes are being made, or anything in relation to that. And what is quite interesting is that on this page, lots and lots of users, hundreds of users post comments or posts where they complain about Facebook or where they post about sort of experiences that I argue are sort of exemplary of alienation. And the way they post about them is in a very affective manner and is also in a very sort of streams of consciousness manner. So I'm just going to read the next quote, and I'm not going to try and sort of convey the affect that's behind it, or you can imagine that it was probably the user must have been in quite an affective state when they posted this. So he says, "I do not want to be contacted at all by Scamper. When I go to my privacy settings, there is not any block app available. He has now also contacted me as Nibbles, because when I reported Nibbles, you said I already had made a report. This is harassment. Their sites have a mechanism that prevents me from deleting their comment from my post, which is preventing me from managing my own page. I must assume that Facebook has enabled them to do this. Otherwise, how is it possible? I will contact the federal authorities. Is this sort of harassment of me, if this sort of harassment of me continues for the amount of good it will do, and then I'm not going to repeat this last sentence there, you can all read it. So, okay, and before I talk about this post, I first sort of, and I don't want to sort of pathologize this post of these users and sort of, it might appear, what's this about? They're all a bit wacky, or this is a bit crazy, or what's that about? For a moment, I want to take seriously what the user or what the users are saying, and try to first understand what they're actually saying here, because I would argue it's fairly difficult to understand what this is actually about. So it seems to be that this user is harassed by another user on Facebook, and this other user, who might be called Scamper, has also created another profile through which they are also sort of harassing or sending this user unwanted messages. The user has tried to block them, or has sort of tried to stop this, but it has been unsuccessful. And they now turn to Facebook to sort of voice or sort of post about this criticism and want Facebook to act and to help, but actually Facebook, with all these comments, Facebook never responds to any. So there is no response on part of Facebook. It's difficult to decipher what the user means, for example, by their sites, or otherwise, how is it possible? What is possible? It's not quite clear what that means. And I argue this points to a sort of alienation, to sort of alienating qualities of the user has experienced. And this post is actually quite sort of symptomatic of many on this page. And so what I would argue is that, actually alienation is not really discussed here as an idea. It's not, the user is not alluding to, or is not saying, oh, I feel really powerless, I feel really alienated, I have no control here. But it's actually more about a sort of affective experience that the user is trying to put into a narrative. And we could argue that sort of gut feelings or hunches that the user may have of sort of generally, being alienated in capitalism, where they have no power, and they actually say Facebook is sort of cooperating or collaborating with governments and corporations. They're all in tight, as he says. May sort of relate to experiences of alienation. But then the user also says that they will, contact the federal authorities to sort of get a solution to this, which may be, a slight contradiction in their discourse. And of course, we could also think about that this may actually maybe relate to the user's sort of inability to use Facebook properly, and maybe Facebook is not at all to blame for this, but we don't know. And I would argue, that on this page, the users post about specific experiences that in most cases are sort of a frustrating nature to them, and of course, and most of the time, Facebook actually works for them, and they are all on the platform. But then, if something doesn't work, they turn, or some of them turn to this page. How am I doing for time? 2.5 minutes. Oh, right. Okay. Very briefly, just a second quote, which sort of relates more to this idea that alienation is always part of a relation whereby we have actually created something that is part of this relation of alienation. Where here a user says, if my posts are glitched anymore, I mean they're actually taken away from me, I will file a lawsuit against Facebook. My son is a former Attorney General, and he's a fantastic prosecutor. I will file charges with the Federal Trade Commission. I will have them monitor my posts as I type them and see for themselves. Sick of your liberal crap, are you even American? So, first of all, it's quite interesting how notions of consumer capitalism, of state, bodies that are related, sort of responsible for customer relations are sort of invoked here and referred to, and something that sort of belongs to the user, or the user thinks belongs to them, is actually sort of disappearing, and they have no explanation for it. And I would argue that in these cases, this Facebook site actually serves quite an important purpose insofar as users seem to go there to discharge this, this affective experience, where they actually have a platform or a space where they can post about this experience that they had, and many of them then go on to name what things they're going to do. And as in this case, and also in the previous quote, they all say, okay, I'm going to do this, 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 and I would argue, sort of from a psychoanalytic angle, this is an act where, possibly unconsciously, the users sort of re-ascribe themselves or sort of give themselves a sense of agency again that they actually don't have on this social networking site, where they say what specific things they're going to do, and actually it doesn't matter if they are really going to do, this user might not contact the Federal Trade Commission, or he might never receive a reply from them. But in posting about this, they have given themselves a sort of agency that is turned into a narrative that is actually public and there for all to see. And this, I argue, is quite an important sort of psychic function in this relation that they have with Facebook.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.